One issue that Republicans successfully exploited in this year's elections was their fear of the transgender community. Republicans spent at least, get this, $215 million on anti-trans TV ads, with the most prominent coming from the Trump campaign itself.
Even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
Trump's argument was that Vice President Kamala Harris is fighting for they, them, while he's fighting for you. Aaron Reed, an independent journalist covering LGBTQ issues, tracked Trump campaign spending and found that they spent, more money on anti-trans ads than they did on housing, immigration, and economy ads combined. For context, in the entire 50 states, transgender adult Americans make up 0.5, not 5, 0.5% of the population, or 1.3 million Americans out of like 320 million. There are a little over 300,000 transgender youths in America. That's 1.4% of all young people between ages 13 and 17. That would be the numerical equivalent of the Republican Party targeting the entire city of Phoenix, Arizona, population 1.65 million, because they don't like the desert landscape. In fact, there are more kids who have been exposed to gun violence, estimated at 3 million, than there are transgender Americans of all ages in total. Targeting trans people isn't new. It is an age-old tradition, which Nazi Germany did with brutally violent ends in the 1930s. While the Supreme Court refuses to do anything about weapons of war in schools, today they seemed inclined to uphold Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors. While the decision is not expected for months, a majority of the justices parroted a string of debunked talking points, all under the guise of protecting the kids, just not every kid.
You say there are benefits from allowing these treatments, but there are also harms, right, from allowing these treatments. At least the state says so, including lost fertility, the physical and psychological effects on those who later change their mind and want to detransition, which I don't think we can ignore.
My understanding is that the Constitution leaves that question to the people's representatives rather than to 9 people, none of whom is a doctor.
Joining me now is Kelley Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign. Kelley, it's good to see you. So detransition, this is one of the things that you do hear often when people talk about trans people, that a majority of people who get gender-affirming care later change their mind. Statistically, is that true?
No, it is not. It's blatantly false.
Right.
You know, when we talk about this care, gender-affirming care, we're talking about care that has decades of research behind it, that every major medical organization in this country supports. And for me, you know, when I think about the particular question in front of the Supreme Court, whether or not trans kids should have the same access to health care as every other kid, this is disturbing to me as a parent. Look, I cannot imagine being in a position where my child needs access to life-saving care that I agree to, that their pediatrician agrees to, and a politician stands in the way of that. Anyone that's watching this right now should be outraged, because if they can do this to trans kids, they could do it to any of our kids.
The second thing, and the arguments today in the Supreme Court, which you listened to, were about protecting girls. Well, they didn't care so much about protecting teenage girls who are pregnant by rape, but we'll just move on from that, from Mr. Alito's decision on that. But the idea of protecting girls, what were the arguments like in court today, and what would be the counter argument to you're more likely to get hit by a bus in a Central Park than you are to ever meet a trans kid. Let's just be clear. There are almost none of them. They don't exist anywhere else. There are very few of them. But the idea that they are a threat to girls, especially in sports.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, and that's part of the misinformation and lies that they've been peddling against the trans community for the last several months. And the thing is, you mentioned this earlier, this is not new. The same sorts of lies they're telling about the trans community, they've said about black women before, they've said about immigrants before. This is all fear-mongering to take us away from the fundamental issue. The question before the Supreme Court today was a question of whether or not trans kids deserve equal protection under the Constitution or not, making sure that they get the same access to health care as every other child in this country can get. So the question before them is about discrimination. And if we're in a world where we're allowing any small group of people to be discriminated against, we're in trouble. Like you said, the trans community represents less than 1% of the total population in America. And in the last 2 years, we've seen over 400 bills targeting this community alone. Right. Let's be clear, this is dangerous that they are taking such efforts.
Why do you think there's such an obsession over such a tiny group population?
I think it's about fear. Look, my community has experienced this before. A lot of people don't yet know somebody who is trans or non-binary.
Well, they don't know they don't.
Exactly. And we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to share the reality of their lives. And when I was at the Supreme Court today, that's what I actually saw. I saw hundreds and hundreds of families from all across the country that were there to affirm their kid's identity and to show every trans kid watching that there are adults, there are people across this country that have your back, and sharing the joyful stories, not just the stories of harm that we so often hear in the media.
Yeah. If this goes the way I think it's going to go and Tennessee wins, what happens, do you think?
Well, for me, I don't think that we have a crystal ball to really interpret exactly what the Supreme Court's going to do. And there's some positive signs, right? Like Gorsuch was the one that actually authored the majority opinion in Bostock that affirmed that you cannot be discriminated against on the basis of sex or gender identity in the workplace. A district judge appointed by Donald Trump was the person that initially put in an injunction on the ban in Tennessee. So I'm hoping that if they follow the facts, if they follow the science, there is a path for them to do the right thing, to stand on the side of the law and on the side of the Constitution. But if they don't, we're going to do what we've always done and keep showing up. And what I see right now happening is a momentum of people that are understanding what's at stake, not just for the trans community, but for all of our communities if we allow our freedoms to be encroached upon.
As somebody who is a leader of a civil rights organization trying to defend the LGBTQ community, how do you feel about the fact that there was more money spent attacking trans people and trans kids in this election than anything? The economy, jobs, immigration, dwarfed by this. Why?
Yeah, honestly,
how do you feel about that?
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
To think that we're in an era of politics where politicians are spending so much time bullying our children, that is disheartening to me. At a time when we need to be finding unity and bringing people together and focused on how to make sure we're ending things like gun violence in our communities and ensuring each child has a chance to thrive. But what also gives me hope is that this was an historic day. The court has never heard a case on gender-affirming care. We've never had a trans person argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. We've never had people like Sarah McBride walk the halls of Congress as an out trans person. So even in our darkest moments, I think there are still pieces of light that we can't ignore. We've got to hold on to that because that's the only thing that's going to get us through the next few years.
I actually think you need to call me every day for an uplifting conversation. You and those adorable earrings that I want. I want earrings. They're super cute. Kelley Robinson, thank you. You've actually made me feel better. I went in real cynical into this segment, but damn it, I think I feel better. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.